Airstrikes on Gaza have continued. Israel says it's targeting Hamas units that led the deadly weekend attacks and is preparing for a possible ground offensive. But the effects of the bombardment have been devastating to the densely populated territory as concerns of a humanitarian crisis grow.
Agony fills the air. These people are desperately looking for survivors while pulling bodies out of the rubble. Dawn has brought the sight of new destruction to Gaza, with entire blocks razed by overnight strikes.
The houses of my family, my neighbors and mine were hit. I came out of the house to find my children injured. The whole square was completely destroyed.
These are children. Children. They show no mercy. The Palestinian territory, one of the most crowded places on earth, has been under siege since Saturday in a near-constant bombardment. Israel says it's hitting targets linked to the terrorist group Hamas in retaliation for its attacks over the weekend that killed more than 1,000 people. The army has deployed tens of thousands of troops to the border as it prepares for a ground offensive. The pressure is steadily rising. So far, the entry of food, water, fuel and medicine into Gaza has been halted, increasing concerns about a humanitarian crisis. Jordan has sent its first aid package to Gaza, but Israel's energy minister says there will be no break to the siege until the dozens of hostages held by Hamas are freed.
Humanitarian aid to Gaza? No electrical switch will be lifted, no water hydrant will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli hostages are returned home. Humanitarian for humanitarian, and nobody should preach us morals.
As the situation escalates, diplomats are seeking to stop the spiral of violence and the release of the hostages held in Gaza.
We can now speak to Hazem Balusha, a journalist based in Gaza. He joins us on the phone. Just tell us, what's the situation there? What's happening right now where you are?
It's very hard, terrifying. The bombardment is continuing since early morning, overnight. Today there was places were intensively targeted more than other places. The main two areas called Al-Karama in the northern end of Gaza City, and then Mukhabarat area attached to it. Many areas were hit as well, but this one was one of the most intensive one. Many buildings reported were destroyed. There was a strike in the beach camp, and some people were killed while they were in the house. Situation in general is very hard. People don't know what to do, where to go. There's no electricity since yesterday. Complete blackout. Power is shut. The two sources of electricity is out of service. The telephone services is very limited. It keeps cut. Most of the places have no internet connection. The water supply was affected. Many people don't have drinking water or clean water for washing. The Rafah crossing is still closed, and people are not able to leave in case they want to. Sometimes the Israeli army is telling people to evacuate area in order to attack it. Sometimes today they dropped leaflets on certain areas that they want the people to leave it. Some people go to UNRWA schools. UNRWA is talking about over 200,000 people taking UNRWA schools as shelters, but with very limited sources there. The Ministry of Health in Gaza hospitals are at risk as well.
I'm afraid I have to cut you off here because we are running out of time. Thank you very much. The journalist Hazem Balusha there in Gaza for us. We'll speak again to you in the next hour. And earlier, I spoke with Avraham Berg. He's a former Speaker of the Israeli Parliament and a vocal critic of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his policies. And I asked him if he were still Speaker, would he support Netanyahu's new wartime unity government?
That's a very petty little political question, because it's not about who sits around the table, but what is the end game? What is the strategy? It looks now that the strategy of Israel is anger and revenge. And I do not support neither anger nor revenge as a political advisor. Yes, there is a lot of sorrowness in this society. There is not even one home that doesn't know somebody, didn't lose somebody, have people kept hostages in Gaza, and the sorrow is so deep and so profound, yet it does not justify all means. Going after the leaders of Hamas and the soldiers of Hamas, it's a legitimate target. Going against an innocent population in masses, in a kind of a collective punishment, the answer is no. So whether I am a simple civilian like I am today, or a political leader like I used to be, my value system is the same. Enemies are to be fought, and innocent people are to be engaged with the process of peace. But if the government does not have second part, it does not have a legitimacy for the first part.
Now, the language coming from Israel at the moment to crush and eliminate Hamas, are you behind that or not?
Listen, language is very important because it's a mirror, it's a reflection of the soul. A lot of what I know about Israel today is not coming through the Israeli media. It comes through the fantastic media report and journalism report done by foreign agencies, like your amazing Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem, that through her reports, I know what happens a couple of kilometers away from my home. And when I see the pictures, my blood boils. But when I listen to the language, I cannot accept it. I do not accept any human beings defined as an animal. Nobody is an animal, because if my enemy is defined as an animal, it is as if a relief, an excuse from responsibility. And I say, no, these are human beings with evil behavior, with awful upbringing, that I have to address them as the worst expression of humanity. And I have to admire the other voices which are not like them and address them as the peak of humanity. But nobody should be addressed as animal, as Untermensch or Untermenschen, because this kind of language is not a one that either describes the reality or help us to move onwards.
Mr. Berg, you said earlier that you do not support the strategy currently being taken by Israel, like what some call the siege of Gaza. What is then the alternative for that? What would be a valid strategy in your opinion?
First, there is no strategy. There is only very aggressive and very violent tactics. Go after them, kill them. It is as if to satisfy the political base, or at least to restore some international macho position. And I do not believe that's a real strategy. A real strategy should be actually one that is divided into three elements. The first one is, yes, to put down as much as possible active Hamas militant individuals. The second is to engage those Palestinian, either peace lovers or people who are committed to the political process, be them in Ramallah and even hundreds of thousands of them in Gaza, to engage them politically speaking and publicly speaking into a different process between Israel and the Palestinian people. And the third is the international community. Only a coalition which goes from Egypt and Jordan, the Abraham Accord countries, the Emirates, Morocco, Saudi Arabia now, United States of America and the European Union, only them together to come and enforce the sides, to sit down together and actually put down swords and raise up alternative political systems. So it's an international involvement, separation between bad people and good people, and a political process.
Let's change the subject ever so slightly. Do you think this war could have been prevented and or could have been foreseen?
This is the kind of wisdom that I always have de facto. De jure, it's a bit more difficult, but I put it as follows. Two kinds of shortcomings of my government made it possible, not made it responsible, but made it possible. The first is the fact that constantly, for years now, Netanyahu's under his leadership, though I do not think he's a real leader. I think he's being led by his own personal criminal agenda. But through his so-called leadership, preferred the Hamas over the Palestinian Authority. And he actually nourished these Hamas people in order not to negotiate with the PLO people, with the Palestinian Authority people, because dealing with the Palestinians who are the politically elected or appointed or selected or recognized Palestinian representatives means a Palestinian state. And this is something that he didn't like. So he preferred the extremists over the moderate. And now his investment pays back so painfully. The second is Netanyahu is frightened to death from his political base, which are the settlers and mainly the aggressive religious fanatic settlers in the West Bank. And he abandoned all the Israelis around Gaza. And he abandoned all the other Israelis in order to save his sacred settlers in the greater land of Israel in the West Bank. And take these two together, prioritizing the settlements and negotiating and promoting Hamas makes him very responsible. It could have been prevented if Israel for the last generation, and most of this political generation was under the prime ministership of Netanyahu, would have built a very viable Palestinian alternative, which is not religiously zealot, which is not fundamentally fanatics. And the fact that we do not have this alternative is actually the blood on the hands of the prime minister, though we have to remember that the real killers and the real villains here are these malicious, diabolic barbarians that committed the atrocities of the last weekend.
Abraham Burke there, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the United States stands with Israel as it reels from Hamas terror attacks. During his visit to Israel, Blinken has also been meeting with survivors of the attacks and families of Israelis who are being held hostage by Hamas. He says the US is working to secure their release. Blinken described Hamas attacks as depravity in the worst possible way. He will travel to Jordan tomorrow, where he is scheduled to meet with the Palestinian Authority president. Sami Sokol is a freelance journalist. He joins us from Jerusalem. Sami, what more can you tell us about Antony Blinken's visit today?
Yeah, well, this was a very emotional visit. The kind of visit that the Israelis were very much expected to hear. We know that he was shown pictures of babies who were killed in one of the kibbutzim inside Israel. I must say that Hamas today has announced that they're not behind these atrocities and that maybe someone else was there. But in any event, what we heard from Blinken is reiterating the Israeli position, equating Hamas with evil, with ISIS. He was talking about the Holocaust. He was talking about pogroms. And this is the kind of things that Israel wants to hear now, especially as it's preparing the public and the international community ahead of this campaign. that we're expecting to see, and that is ongoing. Blinken's visit is a display of the presence of the Americans in the region, and we are also seeing these other visits in this area. The meeting with the Qataris. Not only is he dedicated to help and assist and release the hostages, but it's showing all the players in the region that the United States are here, and they're going to play an active role in this coming period.
Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu also just spoke in the Knesset. How close is Israel getting to a ground offensive into Gaza?
Yes, exactly. In the Knesset, they're swearing in a new cabinet with the entrance of Benny Gantz, who was the chief of staff, and he will be in this small war cabinet. This is in order to have a leadership that the Israeli public will trust, and so as to kind of break the opposition. It's true that the head of the opposition party, Yair Lapid, refused to join this government. But nevertheless, the entrance of Gantz, this is the kind of thing that is preparing the public. And what we hear is that this campaign is going to last for months. We hear that this is going to be a major campaign inside the Gaza Strip, where they will go from house to house. They will be destroying the tunnels. They will dissect the Gaza Strip. I mean, these are the kind of scenarios that you hear in the Israeli media from military experts, and the Israelis know that they will also have to pay a price during this campaign.
Sami Sokol there in Jerusalem for us. Thank you very much. Blinken's words come as the UN says nearly 340,000 people have been forced to leave their homes in Gaza, with fears of a humanitarian crisis growing as Israel continues to launch airstrikes on the territory. Israel says it's hitting targets linked to the terrorist group Hamas after its unprecedented attacks over the weekend that killed at least 1,200 people in Israel. Meanwhile, Palestinian authorities in Gaza say more than 1,400 people have been killed by Israeli strikes. Here's what Netanyahu and Blinken had to say.
President Biden was absolutely correct in calling this sheer evil. Hamas is ISIS, and just as ISIS was crushed, so too will Hamas be crushed. And Hamas should be treated exactly the way ISIS was treated. They should be spit out from the community of nations. No leader should meet them. No country should harbor them. And those that do should be sanctioned. Tony, my friend, I say to you, I say to all of us, there will be many difficult days ahead.
You may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side. Israel has the right, indeed the obligation, to defend itself and to ensure that this never happens again. As the Prime Minister and I discussed, how Israel does this matters. We democracies distinguish ourselves from terrorists by striving for a different standard, even when it's difficult, and holding ourselves to account when we fall short. Our humanity, the value that we place on human life and human dignity, that's what makes us who we are. And we count them among our greatest strength. That's why it's so important to take every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. And that's why we mourn the loss of every innocent life. Civilians of every faith, every nationality who've been killed.
And we are currently waiting on another press statement by Antony Blinken, and we'll bring you that live as soon as it happens. But first, earlier, I asked DW's senior international correspondent Fanny Fatshar about the message that Blinken is bringing to Israel.
basically that the U.S. stands side by side with Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, they're saying that basically Israel has the backing as long as it's necessary, as long as, in fact, the United States exists, he said. Now, while he's reiterating what he already said before embarking on this Middle East tour, people are, of course, wondering what that actually means in terms of the next steps forward in this war. What was also important, though, in that statement that we just heard there, that Blinken also emphasized the value of civilian lives. So by that, indirectly appealing to Israel as well to show some restraint when it comes to basically bombing Gaza, what is happening right now as we are speaking. So people there, Palestinians, ordinary citizens, are fleeing basically for safety, but where to go? It's such a densely populated area, Gaza Strip, and also there's no way out. In fact, there's a lot of conflicting information whether that very important Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza is going to be opened for civilians to be able to leave, and if not, to actually just at least make it possible that aid can come in. So while there's, of course, this very strong rhetoric here by Mr. Blinken, and as we're speaking, he's actually speaking to Israelis who are trying to deliver some aid to those who are displaced within Israel because of the conflict, people wonder what his presence in Israel is going to have in terms of a consequence, be it for the potential release of those hostages being held captive since Saturday, since Hamas, militant Hamas has unleashed its terroristic attack on Saturday, but also when it comes to Gaza, what kind of action is going to be undertaken to make sure that that civilian life that Mr. Blinken is pointing out on both sides in this conflict, that civilian life is being protected.
Fanny, Blinken will also go to Jordan. What does he want to achieve there?
Basically, he wants to make sure that the presence of the United States being here in Israel and the diplomatic tour that is to follow, because he's not just only going to meet the leader of Jordan, but also the leader of the Palestinian territories of the Palestinian Authority, Mr. Abbas. So what he's trying to do is make sure that actually all the diplomatic attempts that the U.S. was pushing for prior to all of this on Saturday are not going to fall back to square one. Namely, for example, the United States was pushing a lot for some sort of a warming up of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, that, of course, is in jeopardy as Israel is bombing Gaza. And by that, of course, many people in the Arab world are wondering whether that actually makes sense, that there is a tie to be forged between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So what Blinken is trying to do here is showing to the world that the U.S. has a very important diplomatic standing when it comes to mediate this conflict, while at the same time, of course, we do not now know how Iran, for example, is going to react to this physical presence as well of the United States represented by Mr. Blinken in Israel, and how the war as such is going to continue against Gaza.
Fanny Fachar there reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you, Fanny.